A closer look at our criminal justice system. Veteran Dateline producer Dan Slepian first met John Adrian Velasquez, or JJ, in 2002 when he was already serving time for a 1998 murder he did not commit. From his cell in Sing Sing, JJ aided Slepian in his own investigation until he was granted clemency and released in 2021 after more than 2 decades in prison. The Sing Sing files, one journalist, 6 innocent men, and a 20-year fight for justice, tells the deeply personal story of their relationship, their fight to overturn wrongful convictions, and to reform the legal system. I sat down with Slepian and Velasquez for a meet-the-moment conversation.
I didn't know if he was innocent. I didn't know if he was guilty. And I said to him what I say to everybody and who says that they're innocent to me. I said to him, look, I don't know if you're guilty or you're innocent. I am not your friend. I am not your advocate. All I care about is the truth. And if I find evidence of your guilt, it's coming out.
JJ, what was it like from your perspective when you first met Dan and you heard those words?
Initially, it's always painful when you're telling the truth to someone and they're not trying to hear you.
Exactly.
Right? But it's also expected because of the circumstances that I was under. I'm being accused for taking a police officer's or a former police officer's life, which is one of the most heinous crimes someone can be charged with. And so as a young journalist, which Dan was when we first met 22 years ago, I can't expect him to just not know me from anywhere or not have any credible sources and just expect what I'm saying is the truth, right? So the reality was in that moment, as he was saying that, the only thing that I could come up with in my mind was like, how do I get this guy to really believe that I'm not playing with this, that I'm serious, I'm innocent, and I need help? And so I challenged him to prove me guilty. And that's what caught him.
It's not just that you're a singular case. You started covering the wrongful conviction of, again, someone who you were in jail with, David Lemus, who was also wrongfully convicted. And you were in disbelief that there could be 2 people in such close proximity.
It's a 1 in a million case. But when I came to my own moral certainty that David Lemus was probably innocent, I visited him at the prison he was at on Thanksgiving Day, on the anniversary for the murder for which he was wrongfully convicted. But I walk into the lobby that day, and I see a woman holding the hands of 2 little boys, and she stops me and says, "Are you Dan?" I hate to tell this part of the story, bro.
Because you could see those 2 little boys.
Yeah. I wasn't there and I could see them.
JJ's older son was on Maria's right side, John Jr., and Jacob, the littler one, was on her left side. He came up to her waist, And I didn't know who these people were. And Maria says, "My son, JJ, he's innocent. Can you help us?" And I didn't believe her. But it was the little boy, Jacob, who looked up at me with these eyes, these huge, beautiful saucer eyes. And my wife wasn't even pregnant yet. I was about to be a father. I mean, I've known JJ longer than I've known my daughter, who's in college. And I looked at that boy's eyes, and I thought that my immediate thought was, I don't care if his father's innocent or guilty. This little kid should not be in a prison on Thanksgiving morning.
Exactly.
That was the beginning for me. And what happened from there were letters from JJ and a relationship that ensued that today, 22 years later, I would put myself in front of a train for him. I would take a bullet for him.
I know it's emotional.
He's among the closest people in my life.
JJ, and I want to talk about your relationship, but I want to talk about those little boys. Because from that moment on, you were in you're behind bars for another 20 years. What was taken from them in that time, and how hard was it for you to be away from them?
I would say it starts with the fact that what they took from both of us, they took the right to be a father from me, and they took the right to have a father present from them. Our lives were lived in pictures, not in real time. The only real time we had was on visits, where you can barely do anything. And for the first 10 years of my children's life, as a father, I'm scarred because they spent 5 days in school and 1 day in prison and only had 1 day to build their social lives. And that's just not the life for a child.
Not a lot for anybody.
They deserve better.
Absolutely.
Through all of that pain, JJ, you never gave up. You continued to give every piece of evidence you could to Dan for his investigations. You continued to ask for retrial after retrial. You were never granted freedom at that moment. How did you keep going?
Hope, purpose. During the early part of my incarceration, I read this book by Viktor Frankl, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. It's a very thin book, but it's so powerful. It was about Viktor Frankl himself, who was at the concentration camps, and he was studying the people around him. And what he found was that the people who survived the Holocaust survived because they were tied to a sense of purpose. And so that led me to believe that I had to find the sense of purpose while I was in prison. And it took a while for me to figure it out. But when my mother approached me on a visit one day, she was just like, I can see you slipping. I see that you're changing. Don't let this place change you. You need to grow where you're planted. They can lock up your body, but they can't lock up your mind.
In 2021, you did learn that Governor Cuomo granted you clemency. This is not a full pardon. So in the eyes of New York, you are still...
I want to stop right there. This is such of a heart-wrenching testimony. Whenever he made reference to the fact of, you can lock up my body, but you can't lock up my mind, that would be basically the statement that I would make to the Luciferian Lucifer himself pertaining to this imprisonment that I personally feel like that I'm under right now pertaining to being here on the planet Earth. And I know that there's thousands, if not millions, of other people that feel the same way. Because we have been placed here illegitimately due to the fact that the second coming of Christ should have already occurred if the people here in Northwest Tennessee and Washington, D.C. would have done the right and proper thing. But they didn't. There's nothing we can do now about the past towards what actually occurred. The only thing that we can do is move on with our lives and hopefully make our lives better because of what we did go through and because of what we did survive. And the fact of the matter is, if it was not for a divine purpose, I truly don't believe that I would have gotten as far along as I have gotten. And even year before last, while I was in the Tennessee River, I knowed about my son going to have a child, and that was one of the fighting moments of my life in trying to survive in the Tennessee River after almost completely drowning, is that I knew that I wasn't just fighting for myself, but that I was fighting for every little child out there who had either been born or was going to be born, pertaining to standing up for the righteousness of God. And because my son helped to put that purpose in my life, Anastasia may have already been born. I can't remember for sure, but it was right there at the breaking point of that era. And I was thinking to myself, I have to stay alive. I have to stay alive. I have to fight. I have to struggle. I have to keep breathing. I have to keep fighting. Even though I felt like giving up. And I even complimented my son the other day on the fact that he had recently went down to, I guess it was Florida or somewhere right before this last hurricane hit, Helen or whatever its name was, complimenting him on the fact that he gave me a sense of purpose, and I wanted to thank him because of that. I don't think it resonated with him towards just exactly what I was talking about, but he did comment and say, well, thank you.
A convicted criminal, but what was that moment like when the gates opened and you walked outside a free man?
When that gate opened, my purpose was right in front of me because my family was waiting for me right there. My children, my mother. That was my hope. That was my...
And the biggest missionary field that most men have in their lives is the missionary field of their family. Missions begins first at home. And if we can't take care of the things at home, then how in the world do you think that we're going to be able to take care of things beyond our home in other people's lives too as well? I mean, I've been watching on YouTube and Facebook some of the most horrifying scenes out in North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee and even Florida and South Carolina pertaining to this hurricane that recently come up through here. It's absolutely mind-boggling is that people such as myself and people like Al Gore and other people have tried and tried and tried to give out advisories and warnings to the general public that they didn't, or they chose at the time towards not wanting to accept, towards it being truthful. And I guess North Carolina and East Tennessee just got through going through 1,000-year flood. 1,000-year flood. But the thing about these floods and the thing about these bad events, they continue to keep bombarding us again and again and again. And in lots of cases, they keep intensifying in strength towards getting even worse. So it just breaks my heart to see this great nation falling apart and this planet falling apart, that even though we may be imprisoned down here in our bodies, the Luciferian Lucifer, the Antichrist, cannot imprison our minds and our hearts towards what we know that we know pertaining to the Lord thy God and the Lord Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and that one day he will come back for his people just as he promised that he would, and that he would stick it closer than a brother, and that he would not abandon us or leave us. Those are the promises that I stick to, and those are in fact the facts that I'm going to cling to for the rest of my life. And it does give you a sense of purpose in knowing that, hey, if you make it through this storm, maybe you'll be able to make it through the next storm. Maybe it'll make you a little tougher and a little bolder and a little better a person in being able to handle the next thing that may come down the pike that you may end up having to deal or dealt with.
Purpose. I think that as hard as it is for me to swallow what I'm about to say, I've realized that as much as I've been through, there was a need for me to go through that.
There you go.
To be in the position that I am right
there
now,
you go.
to have this conversation with you and to be able to touch the world. Because I am not an anomaly. There are hundreds of thousands of wrongfully convicted people on this earth.
Yes.
And they are suffering.
Yes.
Just like I suffered.
Yes.
And they're not being heard.
And you can watch my full Meet the Moment conversation with Dan Slepian and JJ Velasquez at meetthepress.com. JJ's case is not over yet. We can report for the first time he will be in court tomorrow morning, where a judge is expected to vacate his conviction 27 years after his wrongful arrest. That's all for today. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
And that goes back to my personal testimony, because I was so moved by watching this. The fact of what Secret Service had done in my life, going back into 1989, not only in Madison County, Jackson, Tennessee, whenever they decided that they was going to intervene with the ministry, but also what went on in my life in 1991 in Wheeling, West Virginia, being represented by Jolene Nugent, that was an assigned public defender, of them falsifying records by saying that I had made a statement that I was on my way to Washington, D.C. to take out one of America's presidents. I would have never have said anything about that in regards towards wanting to bring harm or hurt into a president's life, much less anybody else's life. But because that was branded upon me 30 plus years ago, to this day, I'm still fighting this, that some people would say a lost cause. But to me, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, means everything other than different portions of the truth. I mean, anybody can tell bits and pieces of the truth, but are you truly telling all the truth? Are you telling the whole truth? And that's one of the reasons why that we stand in front of our courts to this day, and whenever we make a plea to the judge and with our hand on a Bible, that's one of the things that basically we swear by. That do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, the whole truth, so help you God. And there's so many people that want to pick and choose different facets of the truth by thinking, well, if I tell this amount of the truth, this will be good enough, that this will pretty well cover what needs to be covered. Because if I tell the whole truth, then it's going to reveal my motives, and once my motives is revealed, they sure enough may not believe none of my story, because maybe they had the wrong motives, or maybe they just had taken a decision in their life in the wrong direction. And this is part of why it is so essential for the Windmill Ministries missions to continue on in trying to prevent what we're seeing escalate over in the Middle East right now towards things getting even worse. And it's not just overseas that's affecting our lives, because we that are concerned wants to see what's actually happening all over the world, but it's also right here in the good old USA, pertaining to all the other problems that we have been flooded with for the past 30 plus years. But whenever you have a generation of people that have made this wrong turn, it's very difficult for them to come clean and to say, we was wrong and you was right, Mr. Jackson. Or, we understand that you was set up and framed, and that you should not have gone through the things that you went through, and we understand now your true heart's intent. It's hard to get a society to do that, especially a society over here in America that has dug such of a deep hole, not just for themselves, but dug such of a deep hole for almost everybody, that now we're seeing the aftermath in one form or another, whether or not it's in the form of escalating war scenes, of seeing innocent men, women, and children suffering, especially the elder and especially the children, or seeing the escalation of all these massive forces of nature that is totally, unproportionally out of perspective. Whenever you see this right in front of your very eyes, and you know that you know the truth regarding what has happened in the past, it's difficult for me as an individual to go forth in life, especially knowing that at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, where I live presently in Northwest Tennessee in Weakley County, I still have not, does not get any type of what you would call not just social support, but spiritual support with our brothers and sisters in the Lord. And I guess it's so much easier for the general public to stereotype me toward me being some sort of an anomaly. But the fact of the matter is, there is thousands of other people's lives out there that have been misrepresented or misunderstood, the same as my own. Now, a lot of those people have reached the destitute in their lives that they no longer want to fight. They no longer want to hold the banner. They no longer feel like that they have a purpose because the world has beat them down. And the world would rather leave you down than to pick you back up. But just like that individual's testimony that we just got through hearing, the fight is worth the fight. As long as you know that you know that you know that you're fighting for a just, righteous cause, regardless whether you're putting out advisories or warnings, or you're still fighting for your independence or your freedom or the truth, the fight is still worth the fight in telling not just portions of the truth, but the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help us God. And I really can't emphasize upon that enough regarding the facts of what has went on with the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions, that I know without a shadow of a doubt that there are certain people right here that I went to school with in elementary and high school. I know that there are certain people that know me. I know that they know my heart. I know that they know what I went through as a young child growing up with a brutal father. I know that they know that I had made mistakes in my life. I'm not perfect. And at the age of 63, I have made some wrong turns. But one of the turns that I did not make wrong was I did not threaten to take the life of an American president in 1991 in Wheeling, West Virginia. Because of what that they had done towards trying to stop me in the mission field. And like I told you a while ago, the biggest mission field that we have is with our own families and with our own people that we associate ourselves with in that inner circle. That's the biggest mission field of all, because they know your lives. They know how you feel. They know what you went through. They know the whole truth and not just bits and pieces of it. And it has taken this long, 30 plus years, before my son is finally coming around in having any type of empathy or sympathy towards me, in me and him being able to communicate with one another and talk not only about my affairs, but his too as well, to the degree that now we can relate to one another. I guess it has taken this long for some of his personal experiences that he's went through, some of them good, some of them bad. It's all part of the growing process. It's all part of the evolvement in evolving, maturing, that I guess it has taken this long to start to build back that parent-son relationship that basically the devil tried to destroy, going all the way back into the year 2005, whenever Miss Jackson, Shirley K. Jackson, decided to walk out of my life and leave me hanging high and dry. But the thing about Miss Jackson leaving me high and dry, it wasn't just Miss Jackson that was leaving me high and dry. It was various authority figures right here in Weakley County that wanted to spread a misconception about myself pertaining to falsifying files, that has implications, strong implications of a terrorist, a homegrown terrorist, towards somebody purposely wanting to bring harm and hurt into people's lives, towards screaming and hollering in the middle of the theater, there's a fire, and there is no fire, and you create this panic, and the next thing you know, a bunch of people stampede and stomp on one another, and a bunch of people gets hurt. Or you pull down a fire alarm and create havoc that way. That's what those charges that they charged me, the state of Tennessee, working through various officials here in Weakley County, with Benjamin Dempsey being my representative at that time that I hired. That's what those charges meant. And it was based upon the lie pertaining to Homeland Security that started in 1991 of Mr. Jackson being a potential homegrown terrorist on his way to Washington, D.C. to take out George Walter H. Bush's life. Now, I realize a lot of people that hear my testimony could really, quite frankly, not give a damn, because I personally don't mean nothing to them one way or the other. And like I said a while ago, it would be much easier for humanity, especially those in the continental United States, here in the western United States, it would be much easier for them to knock this off and to throw it off in saying, out of sight, out of mind, that this individual obviously has been touched in the head and that he's off his rocker. Well, I've been touched. There's no doubt. I have been touched. But I have been touched by the precious hand of God. I have been touched by a supernatural entity that has saved my life again and again and again, especially in 1983, whenever an automobile should have cut me completely in half, and me losing 9 units of blood in less than 45 minutes, and then less than a month later, while I had 64 staples, 2-inch staples, holding both pieces of my belly together, where they went in and basically took out all my intestines to be able to go in and remove my spleen and my appendix while they was in there, had attacked me in trying to finish me off, and I went to Kenton, Tennessee in seeking help, and the only type of help that I got was to be branded for the rest of my life that this was an individual that was psychologically, emotionally, chemically imbalanced, because his father was the one that was promoting that ideal in everybody's head. It was my dad that got this ideal looking at a TV show one day off a Donahue show pertaining to lithium, that his son needed to be on lithium because his son had spiritual motivations. Now, James Robert Jackson, my dad, he had another son, an older son, to give you an enlightenment towards what type of abusivenesses that we went through here under his rule, under his hand, that he basically drove his oldest son off into a state of alcoholism, because it was my brother, my older brother, Danny Robert Jackson, that sought alcohol for an escape because of the brutality that was going on at home. And I ain't just talking about somebody that once in a while got on the binge towards getting on alcohol. I'm talking about a full-fledged alcoholic, to the degree that he got caught several times in the state of Tennessee. And there towards the last, I think he had to do a spread of about 3 years before the other spread, which was about 2 years, before the other spread, which was about a year, that he just had an alcoholic problem. Because the alcohol that he sought towards being his savior actually turned out to be his demise. It was the hops in the beer that his body had created a resistance against, to the point that whenever he would drink, his body would react towards having sores and stuff on his body, which created pain. He would drink beer to dull the pain, as well as the psychological pain that he went through with his dad. that would only add that much more misery to his life, because the more that he drank, the more that his body went in pain, and it would help maybe temporarily, but then he would be back with all the sores again. So it was just a leading trajectory of doom and gloom in my brother's life because of that, in which what went on in his life with his father, which was my father. To give you an idea about what we was having to deal with James Robert Jackson, that all of a sudden decided that he was going to be a doctor, a psychiatrist doctor, that he needed his son to be on lithium because his son was talking about the Antichrist. His son was talking about the New World Order. His son was talking about the mark of the beast. His son was talking about the two witnesses. His son was talking about the seven seals. His son was talking about the four horsemen. His son actually made a display, or paid somebody to make a display of the four horsemen that he put in the back of his truck in 1989, and went on 3 major crusades to either New York or Washington, D.C., or all the above. The first spiritual crusade that I went on was with my son. He was about 11 years old at the time. So my dad had an infatuation that his son, his third son, by the name of Dennis James Jackson, was touched. He was touched in the head. That he was talking about things that didn't make no sense to him, to James Robert Jackson. And the reason why it didn't make no sense to James Robert Jackson is because James Robert Jackson never did apply himself in the Bible the way that he should have. Like probably 99.9% of the people in America and throughout the world don't actually look into the deeper factors of the Bible. They are satisfied with John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and whosoever believeth in him shall not perish. And as long as they're comfortable in believing that, that's all they want to know. That's all they feel like that they need to know. That's all they feel like that they're required to know. And for the most part, looking at it theoretically, they're right. The only thing in an individual's life pertaining to their soul is based upon the fact of whether or not they are a true born-again believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. But there's a whole lot more to it than just believing. And that's the part that so many people swing at and miss by 3 foot, that even Lucifer himself believes and knows that God is real and that the Lord Jesus Christ truly was the Lord Jesus Christ, because he fears and trembles under his name. So obviously there's a whole lot more to this thing other than believing. There's also serving. And it's one thing for you to illustrate Jesus towards him being your Savior, and it's another thing towards Jesus actually being your Lord. And I was basically being a subservient to the Lord, in being obedient to the Lord, in having those 4 horsemen apocalypse model displayed in the back of my truck, and going on these crusades. Even Homeland Security felt like that I was out of touch with reality, because it was the federal judge, even though it was nothing but a mascot, a lie, up there in Wheeling, West Virginia, towards me going and getting studied in Butner, North Carolina, that I still have the results from, along with other examinations that I've been through of people wondering about my life, of whether or not I had all my marbles or not. Well, it got so bad with the intensity with my dad and myself, because once more spirituality issues, that I questioned him one day about his relationship with myself versus the relationship with his older son, Danny Robert Jackson. Of Danny Robert Jackson basically using alcohol as a crutch, versus his third son, Dennis Jackson, using God as a crutch. And I asked James Robert Jackson one day, I said, well, Dad, which one's the worst? The sun that's on the bottle or the sun that's on the Bible? And he looked at me, he thought about it. This is an interesting question. He didn't say that, but I could see his expression on his face because he thought about it for a great long time before he ever answered. And his answer was, both. They're equal. One is just as bad as the other. Your older brother, he's obsessed with alcohol, and you're obsessed with the Bible pertaining to God. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Jackson said, they're both equal. One is just as bad as the other because you have allowed for this to basically take over your life. Now, I'm speaking today after my dad has been dead and gone now for several years. Mr. James Robert Jackson, that was a World War II veteran. I'm speaking today not in unison towards wanting to kick up dirt on somebody's grave pertaining to my dad, but I'm speaking in the reference of trying to put things in the right category of you now understanding what we was dealing with down here. And it wasn't just me dealing with this problem. It was my older brother, it was my second older brother, and my younger brother. It was my mother. And certain people around here knows this. But once more, if they cared less about what we was going through then, do you really think, Dennis, I'm talking to myself right now, do you really think, Dennis, that they're going to care about what that you have went through and what that you are even going through right now presently? And the answer to all those question marks would be no, no, no. Now, there may be some of them that has matured, and there may be some of them that's willing to confess to the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, but to actually get them to come to me and make that wrong that right. That, Dennis, you're absolutely correct. You went through, your family went through things that we should have intervened in, or that somebody should have intervened in. To get them to do that would probably be the next thing to impossible. I'm not saying that it is impossible. I'm just saying it's going to be very difficult for the Hayeses, for the Mackrights, for the Cobles, for the Halls, for the Coopers, for the Harrisons, for the Thompsons, for the Willises, for the Bakers, for the Jacobses. It's going to be very difficult for them to come to the reality of themselves by saying, we was wrong, we misjudged Dennis, and we should have stood with Dennis during the time that Dennis needed us the most. Not just Dennis being just a young lad growing up under these abusiveness behavior, but we should have stood with Dennis pertaining to the ministry, because Dennis's ministry that he felt like that he was called into has always supported the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. Regardless whether it was the teachings of love, the teachings of mercy, the teachings of grace, the teachings of forgiveness, the teachings of believing in a supernatural eternity, forever, believing in the teachings of Christ. There's an old saying, and I've made reference to this before, and I'll make reference to it again, that you can lead a horse to the water trough, but you can't make him rain. And you can't. I can't make or force anybody to do anything that they truly don't want to do. And to be quite honest with you, I don't want to. I'm not that type of person that wants to drive somebody into an area that they really prefer not to be driven off into. But what God can do, not Dennis, But what God can do is make people wish or regret that they didn't take that drink from that water trough, and which today, right now, 3 days after a 1,000-year flood had happened in North Carolina and eastern Tennessee, and I don't wish this upon nobody, but the man that I used to work for in Milan, Tennessee, by the name of Jerry Smith, his son, Tony Smith, that I work with side by side, turning the same wrenches, taking fenders and hoods and doors off the cars and putting them back on, that decided that he was going to beat the system by becoming part of the system, by joining up with a major insurance company in Northwest Tennessee that eventually moved to Eastern Tennessee to raise his family and to get away from all the narrow-mindedness here in this area. I was thinking to myself, what if he had lost his home in the flood? What if he had lost everything that he had desired to want to have and keep and work for and fight for, that now it's all gone? Because his brother, as far as I know, is still living, and his mother's still living over in Milan, Tennessee, even though Jerry is dead. But basically, Tony Smith decided that he was going to abandon everybody and move off into another part of the world and live the good life in making the big money for the insurance companies. Even though the whole time that I worked with him for about 3.5, 4 years, he was constantly degrading the insurance companies because he knowed what type of people that the majority of the people that work for these insurance companies was willing to do to their own customer base pertaining to legalized extortion by making promises to their customers and then not being willing to fulfill those promises or those agreements. Even though he degraded that entity in that business, he turned completely against the business and now become part of the entity. And I could think to myself as I was thinking all these thoughts this morning about the 1,000-year flood out in eastern Tennessee and the Appalachian Mountains and North Carolina, because I've been in all those areas up there. There's not too many of those areas in eastern Tennessee and even middle Tennessee and western Kentucky and even places of western North Carolina and even eastern North Carolina that I haven't been in. Very few places that I have not touched base with towards actually visiting. I mean, whenever you go up into Robinsonville, North Carolina, off the Dragon, if anybody knows what the Dragon is, it's a road. I think it's 11 miles. It's got 214 curves in it or something like that. That a good friend of mine by the name of Daniel Stewart, it's a minister that preaches. He's a minister, not too far from Snowbird. But if you go up into those areas and you get to figuring out the people, and a great deal of them can't even speak English because they're so true to their native heritage, you understand what the Appalachian Mountains actually means to a great deal of people. Especially whenever you go and you stay there and you visit there. The very trailer that I have, my first Fleetwood trailer that I brought out here in 2014, actually come from a little community in North Carolina that I got familiar with, that I loved. I had to pay somebody about $1,000 to bring it over here, Maggie's Valley, but it was a beautiful, beautiful place. And give or take, Maggie's Valley ain't too far from Cherokee. Cherokee got flooded. Asheville got flooded, and all the little communities and towns in between got flooded. It's awful. So for me to have sat in bed this morning and thought, well, Tony, you got what you had coming to you, man. If your house did get flooded and you did wind up losing everything that you've ever tried to think anything of. But rather than me thinking that, I want to tell you what I thought if his house did get flooded and he did lose everything. I thought to myself, my God, is this what it takes for people to come to their sense of reality, of understanding that their lives is just as sensitive as everybody else's lives, even though you may have a nest egg, even though you may have crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, you're still just as susceptible as the forces of nature as anybody else. The very entity that you're paying or working for towards trying to take care of people, now is that same entity going to be willing to take care of you? And I'm sure it will. I'm sure that he'll be just fine. Of course, you take in mind a lot of those memories, pictures, a lot of those keepsakes, you won't never be able to replace if that actually occurred in his life. And I hope to God that it didn't. I really do. Though me and him had a disagreement, and though it was him that basically accused me pertaining to my religious status in how passionate that I was along about 1993 while I was working for his dad, that basically looked at me and said, well, you don't have to cram it down my throat pertaining to my ideology, pertaining to the anointing that I felt like that God had placed on my life. A matter of fact, it was a church not less than probably 2,000 feet or less that actually banded me from coming there to that church, Oak Grove Church or whatever the name of it was, Baptist Church, because I'd walked in there with a sign that I'd hung on a tree that promoted Acts 23:9, that if a spirit or an angel has spoken to this individual, let us not fight against this individual, because if we do, we fight against the very substance that this individual was inspired by pertaining to God. That we find no evil in this individual, let us not fight against this individual. And for the past 30 plus years, that's exactly what I have gotten in America. Was one fight after another. I call them ballots or skirmishes, spiritual skirmishes, that if I wasn't going through a spiritual skirmish here in Northwest Tennessee, whenever I first come back in 2014, that basically lasted for 3 years, I was going through other skirmishes up in Nashville. I was going through other skirmishes up in Knoxville. I was going through other skirmishes in Grand Rivers, Kentucky. I was going through other skirmishes in Paducah, Kentucky. I was going through other skirmishes around Land Between the Lakes, and also Cadiz, Kentucky, Trigg County, Kentucky, leading up into Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Christian County, Kentucky. Just like I'd had skirmishes in my life going out into Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, studying and finding out the whole truth rather than just bits and pieces of the truth pertaining to the Oklahoma bombing. Just like I had a skirmish on 2 different levels in Atlanta. First skirmish was shortly after the people in Oklahoma put out a state warrant for my arrest for supposedly threatening one of their officers on the telephone, which I didn't do. And then the second skirmish was whenever I was actually working for Classic Collision, or Collision Classic, whichever way it is, there in Duluth, Georgia, which was basically in the perimeter of Atlanta. I think they call that the metro area. The day of Christmas, whenever I decided to make a cassette tape, the year 2007, and leave a cassette tape on the Capitol building, the same door that Governor Sonny Perdue come out of whenever we got hit by such of a major drought over here in this area that was causing Lake Okeechobee down in Florida and the water system in Atlanta and other parts of eastern Tennessee to basically dry up and become nothing but a powder keg. Left a cassette tape in a clear bag that you could obviously see, with a business card in the clear bag, with a cassette tape in the clear bag, hanging on the door, that basically shut all of Atlanta down to the degree that the following next day, I got a visit by GBS, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, that come to my workplace in Duluth, Georgia, wanting to know what that bag on that door was all about. So yes, I have had skirmishes with various authority figures in America because of spiritual ballots, spiritual encounters. Matter of fact, whenever the spiritual encounter happened in my life that I really don't talk a lot about, after the event happened the first time in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, I wound up going to Fayetteville, Arkansas, where Sam Walton was from. I had a ballot with those officers there. Then I went back to Oklahoma, down around Sand Springs, Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and had another ballot or an encounter with their law enforcement agency there. So I've had different encounters with different authorities in different states. And whenever Donald Trump gets to talking about a witch hunt, they was actually on the hunt towards trying to destroy my life that I could physically feel coming out of the computer, because I could not run from the computer. I could not run from the internet. And no matter where I was, it didn't matter if I was in Basalt, Colorado, 15 miles from Aspen, Colorado, where all the rich people live, or if I was out in Stockton, California, it didn't matter. Or Phoenix, Arizona, or Atlanta, or Jacksonville, Florida, or Knoxville, Tennessee. It didn't matter, because you cannot outrun the computer. And whenever you have people that has purposely, deliberately wanted to destroy your life by putting out all this garbage about you, it actually becomes a little bit more than just stressful. A matter of fact, the individual that we just got to listen to of his conversation of being wrongfully obtained for 20-something years, I can sympathize with, because as far as I'm concerned, the 2.5 years that has been stolen from me because of various psychiatric investigations through various authorities, regardless whether it was the authorities in Kentucky, the authorities in Tennessee, the authorities coming from Washington, D.C. and Wheeling, West Virginia, or the authorities coming from Oklahoma, of these skirmishes that I've had, in total, I have been incarcerated for 2.5 years. And you know what? Once this monster that's been created here in America, once it takes as much as just one day from you, one day, that's one day that you'll never be able to get back. That's one day in the span of your lifespan they have stolen from you illegitimately, especially if you was not guilty of that in which what they was trying to sabotage your life on account of. I want to watch this, Face the Nation. I did want to put in my 2 cents pertaining to that interview, because I felt that it was very, very heart-wrenching, because there is thousands, if not millions of people all over the world that have been wrongfully obtained, wrongfully arrested, or wrongfully misunderstood, evaluated, put in psychiatric wards, whatever, simply because of this evil entity that is ruling here upon this planet, that is out to kill, steal, and destroy. I felt like that his testimony touched my heart so deeply this morning that I needed to record it and put it on some of my material. Please watch on Face the Nation.
Face the Nation. Israel assassinates the head of Hezbollah, potentially expanding the war in the Middle East as the candidates start to feel the heat of yet another global crisis. Israel's strike on the Iranian-backed terrorist group has put more fuel on the fire in the Middle East. As we approach 1 year since the Hamas attack on Israel, what is the impact of this new front? With 5 weeks till Election Day, national security and U.S. foreign policy are increasingly part of the conversation on the campaign trail.
Smart American diplomacy is what keeps the peace. We're not going to have it with Kamala Harris.
We'll speak with Trump ally Senator Tom Cotton and former Trump National Security Advisor Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. Plus, we'll hear from retired U.S. Army General Stanley McChrystal about why he's supporting Vice President Harris. Maryland Republican Senate candidate Larry Hogan will also join us as we preview Tuesday's CBS News vice presidential debate. Plus, we'll get the latest on the flooding and devastation following Hurricane Helene, the monster storm that swept through the South, from FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning, I'm Robert Costa. Margaret is preparing for Tuesday's vice presidential debate. That could be the last time this season that national candidates face off in person. And with just over a month until Election Day, the spotlight is now on how the next administration will deal with challenges across the board. Coming up, we will look at the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, but we begin with mounting fears of an all-out war in the Middle East. Our Imtiaz Tayeb reports from Lebanon.
In this just-released Hezbollah video, the apparent burial shroud of Hassan Nasrallah, inscribed in Arabic with the words, "He was martyred on the way to Jerusalem." As grief gripped supporters of the assassinated Hezbollah leader following the confirmation of his death. Many wept as they stood amid the jagged concrete and twisted metal left by massive bunker-busting bombs used to target the towering figure, who was seemingly invincible. But Nasrallah, who had been in hiding for years, was ultimately no match for Israel's military might or its breathtaking intelligence capabilities after Israeli forces found and assassinated him at a time of sky-high tension. On the streets of the Iranian capital, Tehran, more sorrow. Hezbollah has long been backed by Iran. And Nasrallah's killing is also a major blow to his key ally, the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. But for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who approved the strike that killed him, a major victory. Citizens of Israel, these are great days, he said. We are at what appears to be a historic turning point. That turning point hangs on how Hezbollah will now respond. But following the assassinations of Nasrallah and several of the group's top commanders, its leadership has been decapitated and its fighting forces in disarray.
When the enemy kills the leadership or captures it or decapitates it, the movement comes back stronger and more militant and therefore more of a threat. So I think the Israeli people are not necessarily going to be safer or feel safer.
In the still smoking wreckage of the Beirut neighborhood where Nasrallah was killed, the scale of Israel's actions here and the fear of what it could trigger saw President Biden and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin both insist they were not warned of the attack in advance. The White House has long feared a major escalation between Israel and Hezbollah could trigger a regional war that would not only draw in Iran, but potentially the U.S., as Israel continues to devastate Gaza for nearly a year now. With Hezbollah still insisting it won't stop firing rockets at Israel until there is a ceasefire there.
And Imtiaz joins us now from Beirut. Imtiaz, has Israel delivered a fatal blow to Hezbollah with these strikes?
You know, Bob, I used to live here in Beirut and have been reporting on Lebanon and Hezbollah for years now. And Hassan Nasrallah, while loved by many and hated by some, almost all here strongly admired his fierce resistance to Israel. But his assassination in that massive Israeli strike is likely not a fatal blow to Hezbollah. Now, that's because Nasrallah didn't rule as an autocrat. And today, it appears Hashem Safieddine will emerge as his replacement. Now, Safieddine is a first cousin of Nasrallah and bears a striking resemblance to him. The 60-year-old led the group's executive council, and he is a staunch supporter of the Palestinian cause and is extremely close to Iran, signaling he may rule quite similarly to Nasrallah. Now, back in 2017, the U.S. also added Safieddine to the terrorist blacklist. Bob.
MTS Tayeb, thank you. We are joined now by Senator Tom Cotton, an Arkansas Republican. He sits on the Senate Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. Good morning, Senator. We appreciate you being here. What's next, Senator Cotton? Do you believe there will be an expanded war between Israel and Iran on the horizon?
Well, Bob, I'm not sure that Israel's expanding the war so much as it is trying to end the war. I think it's important to stress just what a huge blow the last 2 weeks have been against Hezbollah. Iran is behind all of these terror networks, but Hezbollah is its most potent weapon. Hezbollah has over 100,000 rockets and missiles and mortars aimed at Israel. Iran has used that threat to deter Israel for years, going back probably 20 years or so. And now that Israel has absolutely devastated the entire leadership structure of Hezbollah, whether it's the attacks that came just late last week, killing not only Hassan Nasrallah and all the other leaders, or some of their other actions, or hitting their weapons depots and manufacturing sites in Syria, now is not the time for a ceasefire or to de-escalate as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want. Hezbollah is on its knees. The United States should help Israel drive Hezbollah to the mat and choke it out and finish it off once and for all. That means for the first time in decades, Iran would be exposed on its flanks with no terror proxy capable of devastating Israel or our troops and our friends in the region. That's what we should do, not demand that we have a ceasefire, de-escalate at a time when Israel is trying to win. We should let Israel win.
Senator Cotton, when you say drive Hezbollah to the mat, would that mean a ground invasion of Lebanon by Israel, and would you support that kind of incursion?
If that's what Israel needs to do to eliminate the remnants of Hezbollah's leadership and its arsenal, then yes, of course. Again, Hezbollah had over 100,000 missiles and rockets and mortars. Now, a lot of those have probably already been destroyed. Israel needs to destroy all of them. A lot of Hezbollah's leadership has been destroyed as well. This guy that y'all just cited there, maybe he's the leader. I don't know who's in charge of Hezbollah. I'm not sure anyone else does either. It's probably someone who wasn't important enough to have a beeper or a walkie-talkie as recently as 2 weeks ago. But all of Hezbollah's leadership needs to be eliminated, just like all of its arsenal needs to be eliminated.
It's not practical. What they're talking about right now is really the next thing to impossible. You're not going to be able to destroy all of the enemy or all of the enemy's tools pertaining to the bullets and the bombs and the missiles and etc. What they're talking about is basically an impossible task. So in that reality, the leader of the prime minister of Israel over there, Jerusalem, he is actually part of the problem versus the solution to it, because you're not going to be able to take the enemy out. A matter of fact, the only person that can take the enemy out is God himself. Now, there's no doubt Israel has a right to defend itself. And Israel, under various circumstances, if they know that people are plotting to attack them or destroy them, I think that they have every right in the world to go after that particular party of people or that particular country or whatever and try to do something about it, intervene. But it's not practical in thinking that you're going to be able to take out every missile and every bomb and every bullet from Hamas. Besides that, the Bible teaches us that says, let the wheat grow with the tares until time of harvest. It will be God that will be the harvester. It will be God and the angels of God that will be the reapers of this world that will come forth, that will bring destruction to the devil and the devil's people. In the meantime, God and God's people, regardless whether you like it or not, because I darn sure don't like it, living down here, are basically entrapped. Going back to that individual's testimony towards him being in jail, that you can jail my body, you can entrap my body, but you can't entrap my mind, you can't entrap my heart, you can't entrap my faith in God. Though I got to be beat upon, slapped around, lied upon, and mistreated, you can do that to me, but just because you do that to me does not mean that you have won the war. Once more, the Bible teaches towards saying, let the wheat grow with the tares until time of harvest. The tares are the wicked ones, and the wheat, in this particular scenario, the wheat is God's people. He used this as a parable. And we're supposed to understand the parables in the Bible and realize that, hey, it's not our place to necessarily take out all the evil. Now, if the evil gets out of hand, and if the evil is doing things to the godly people that it ain't supposed to be doing to the godly people, and we got a right to stop that or intervene in that, yes, 100%, regardless whether it's Jerusalem or America or whatever nationality or country that you're from. Whenever evil starts dominating good, then good has a right to intervene. But as far as actually going after evil, there's nowhere in the Bible where it teaches us to do that. A matter of fact, according to Jesus' teaching, we're supposed to leave those people alone and let whatever falls up into their life fall up into their life, because basically they have brought this upon to themselves. In other words, the wicked will turn against the wicked because they're not to be trusted, and that's the type of people that they are. They're throat cutters. And if they'll lie and cut somebody else's throat, don't you think they'll lie and cut your own throat? So these people that are bedding down with these people are of the same caliber, pertaining to evil. Evil interbreeds evil. Darkness attracts more darkness. But as far as the light, yes, we are supposed to protect ourselves from the evil. And if we have certain people over here in America in judicial justice systems that won't take care of the light because of the evil, well, then they need to be eliminated too, towards going home and seeking a new job pertaining to dereliction of duty. And that's one of the primary things that I continue to keep talking about pertaining to what went on here between the year 20 and 14 and 20 and 17, right here at 430 Beach Grove Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, or 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, is that certain individuals was supposed to have done certain jobs that we hired attorneys for, my brother and I, and still got let down. And it wasn't a matter of us falling through the cracks. Whenever they say, well, they fell through the cracks, that meant that it was done ignorantly. What went on here in Weakley County, and even going all the way back to 1983 in Obion County, Kenton, Tennessee, was not done ignorantly. What went on in my life in Paducah, Kentucky, and around Aurora, Kentucky, and over in Land Between the Lakes, was not done ignorantly. That was done intentionally. What went on in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, towards an officer lying about me threatening his life, after they had put a bomb in the back of my truck and promoted me all over TV towards me being the monster. These was things that they initiated. I did not initiate warranting a warrant to put a bomb in the back of my truck and then post me all over TV towards me being the bad guy out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, just because I was out there investigating the Oklahoma bombing. They done that. They promoted that ideal. They put that all over their circuitry pertaining to wanting to image me in a vocabulary of somebody that was basically being out of his mind, or the words that they said, out of touch with reality. Well, now we see that I was right about a government cover-up pertaining to the Oklahoma bombing that did not reveal the whole truth, all the truth, to the victims as well as the people in Oklahoma and the people throughout this great nation, as well as I was right about electrical disturbances and storms, and now the atmosphere is holding more moisture, and whenever it does release the moisture, it releases it in the form of a deluge, and now we're seeing massive flooding, just like the Bible teaches that whenever you shall see these things starting to occur, to flee into the mountains. Why did Jesus tell us to flee into the mountains? Was it just because we wanted to be mountaineers? We wanted to be mountain men? I don't think so. Jesus foreseen what humanity was going to do to ourselves and do to this planet, and that's the reason why the book of Revelations expresses it towards being sorrows. Great sorrows. Woe be unto the inhabitants here upon to the planet, whenever you shall start to begin to see all these things occurring. We'll go from one extreme to another, either the driest of the dry or the wettest of the wet. The hurricanes that used to only come every 50 years or every 100 years, and then it narrowed down to every 20 years, and then it narrowed down to every 10 years. Now we're seeing these type of Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes on this side of the equator, sometimes 2 and 3 times a year. And on the other side of the equator, down towards China and Japan, it even gets even worse. It even gets even worse. They're more intensified over in that area. The winds is even higher. Some of the worst forces of nature that I've seen hit this planet is only intensifying, getting worse. So whenever they talk about going to take out all the bombs and all the threats, good luck. Good luck in that. Now, there's a potential threat versus just a regular threat. The true godly people upon this planet, regardless whether you be a Jew or a Gentile, are always going to have a certain amount of threat. We're always going to have a bullseye tied to our back. And we're always going to be seen by our enemy as being an enemy, even though we're the ones that love them. We may not love what they do, but we still love their soul. We don't want to see them go to hell. We don't want to see them be punished this way. But we're the ones that are the compromisers up until a certain extent. And then once you go beyond that extent, now it is not recommended for us to compromise. Now it is recommended for us to take care of ourselves and take care of our loved ones and take care of those that needed to be taken care of, pertaining to those that can't take care of themselves. That's not what happened in Weakley County, Tennessee from the year 2014 up until the year 2017 when my brother died. They failed in the courts of Dresden, Tennessee towards taking care of the Jackson family down here. That if you get to studying the whole scenario, way before I even come back here, basically World War III had already done broke out between the Hatfields and McCoys down here before I even stepped back into the picture. In addition to what my people has been an asset to, towards a pillar of this society, towards helping to establish this area during the time that it was nothing but a frontier. I had people that come into this area shortly after 1776 when we become a nation, probably before this state ever become a state. During the time of Davy Crockett, I had people right here in either Obion County or Weakley County that was being a predominant cornerstone to this area. And to think that we got treated the way that we was treated up here in Dresden, Tennessee, simply because of rumors, innuendos, and lies. You don't think that I'm heartbroken by this? You don't think that that broke my brother's heart, David Jeffrey Jackson, to the extent that it helped put him in an early grave at the age of 51? Sure it did. Sure it did. But once more, to get the people to admit to that, or even the courts to admit to that, you'd probably have better luck in pulling hen's teeth.
Just like
which I don't even know that a hen has teeth. I guess they do it to some degree. Little bitty old pigs. I guess they call them teeth.
States needs to be much more forceful in attacking Iran's terror army in Yemen, where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had our sailors resting like sitting ducks in the Red Sea for months. When we finish mopping up all of these terrorist proxies, that means Iran, once again, is totally exposed. It no longer can threaten Israel and the United States and our friends throughout the region. That's why we need to back Israel to the hilt and let Israel win, rather than continue to make these feckless demands for ceasefires and de-escalation that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have been doing for a year now.
You sit on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Is there an alarm sounding in your ranks about any potential threats to Americans in the Middle East or to U.S. targets at this point?
Well, from the minute Joe Biden and Kamala Harris got to the White House, there's been threats to Americans. Iran and its proxies have attacked our troops over 100 times, and we've barely ever struck back. There's been continued attacks on us. Again, just like we should support Israel in striking back against these terrorists, we should be striking back harder again. But that's not Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's policy. From the very beginning, they've appeased and conciliated the Ayatollahs. Kamala Harris, for instance, opposed Donald Trump's strike that killed Iran's terrorist mastermind in 2020. Over the last 4 years, they've given away tens of billions of dollars in sanctions relief. They've looked the other way as Iran violates sanctions. They've continually put more pressure on Israel than they put on Iran's terrorist proxy. That's why Kamala Harris is the Ayatollah's hand-picked candidate, and why the Ayatollahs are hacking into Donald Trump's campaign and trying to kill him.
Turning to Ukraine, former President Donald Trump, you're a big supporter of his. He met with President Zelensky in recent days in New York. He talked about a potential deal to end the war. What kind of deal would that be? How would it exactly look? You're close to Trump in this process.
Well, he hasn't been specific, and I think that's for a reason. One, he doesn't know what the world is going to look like in another 3 months when he takes office. He doesn't know how much more Joe Biden and Kamala Harris might screw things up. But here's what we do know. This never would have happened on Donald Trump's watch, because it didn't happen on Donald Trump's watch.
Don't believe that. Do not believe that. The first part of it, do not believe. The second part of it, that they said that it didn't happen on Donald Trump's part, you can believe that part, because it didn't. But as far as them saying that it would not have happened, speaking futuristically into the future, if Donald Trump was the president, that's speculative. That's pure speculative, and they don't know that to be a fact. A matter of fact, it could have went even worse with Donald Trump being the president, because as far as I'm concerned, you can be too gun-ho. You can piss a bunch of people off to the degree that they do wind up merging on you, ganging up on you. Now, that's my opinion. I got a right to my opinion, just like everybody's got a right to theirs. But I'm telling you right now, the things that he just got through saying, part of it was accurate and the other part was not accurate. Let's back it up and listen to it one more time.
Trump's watch.
Back it up. Back it up. Let's listen to him right here.
Office. He doesn't know how much more Joe Biden and Kamala Harris might screw things up. But here's what we do know. This never would have happened on Donald Trump's watch, because it didn't happen on Donald Trump's watch.
See, they tell
this never would
have
have happened on Donald Trump's watch.
They tell part of the truth.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris might screw things up. But here's what we do know. This never would have happened on Donald Trump's watch, because it didn't happen on Donald Trump's watch.
So they tell part of the truth, thinking that it's going to fulfill the rest of their speculations in it presenting itself as the truth, but in reality, they don't know that. Don't nobody know that. And we won't never know that, because Donald Trump did not get elected the second time. As I said a while ago, it could actually be just the opposite. It could have actually been worse.
Putin has invaded Ukraine twice, both times with Joe Biden in the White House. First as Barack Obama's understudy, second with Kamala Harris in the White House with him. That came just a few months after the disastrous collapse in Afghanistan. Those things are not unrelated. When you project weakness, as Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have, and you suggest to your enemies that they can push you around and walk all over you, you get the kind of conflicts we see in Europe and that we see in Israel, and you get the chaos we see at our southern border. Bob, the administration just acknowledged.
I know, but Ukraine for a second. Just pause on this for a second, Senator. Senator Vance, who's going to be at the vice presidential debate on Tuesday, hosted by CBS News, he's talked about on a recent podcast a demilitarized zone as a part of a potential peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. He said it could look like something like the current line of demarcation between Russia and Ukraine that becomes a demilitarized zone, heavily fortified so the Russians don't invade again. The details matter here. Would a demilitarized zone be something as part of a peace deal that you would be comfortable with as a Republican senator?
The details do matter, but Donald Trump has said he's not going to negotiate against himself or against Ukraine in advance. Once he takes office, that's the time to start hammering out the details in private and to make sure that something like this can't happen again, which didn't happen when he was president after the first invasion of Ukraine. But again, I just want to say the chaos that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have unleashed across this world isn't limited to the other side of the world. It happens right here. The administration just acknowledged that they released more than 13,000 convicted murderers who illegally entered this country, more than 15,000 convicted sex offenders. That's 28,000 rapists and murderers who illegally entered our country, who Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have let roam our streets. That's the kind of chaos that they have unleashed for the last 4 years and that Donald Trump will put an end to.
You're confronting the Democrats here on this show. You're bringing up all of your different arguments. Former President
Donald Trump, if he gets reelected, hopes to put an end to. Once more, whenever you're listening to these silver-tongued talkers, these politicians, you have to recognize the differences between fact versus them being speculative. They're speculating. And a lot of times you really got to listen real close because they'll mix them in so closely together that if you really don't take it and break it down in deciphering what they're actually trying to say or what they're promoting towards wanting to say, you'll never get it. You'll never truly understand the differences between the truths and the lies, or the fact versus the fiction. They're swift. Oh, don't think for a second that they're not swift. They're silver tongue talkers. They can talk you, like Bill Clinton, they can talk you into buying a rotten watermelon and put it in the back end of your car, and it tastes good before you ever get it home. That's how good they are. They are silver tongue talkers. The Bible talks about these type of people that can do this. Ear ticklers. They basically are saying things that people want to believe, regardless whether it be believable or not. They would want to present their story or their promotion in it being believable, because that's really the only way that they're going to get people to support them. Think about it. It's a sales pitch.
And Trump, even though there are just a few weeks left in the campaign, has so far said he does not want to participate in another debate with Vice President Harris. Is that a mistake? Do the American people deserve to hear more from former President Trump and the Vice President about their views?
Well, I think they deserve to hear a lot more from Kamala Harris because she's been lying to them for the last 3 months. If you look at her record, she's been trying to run away from it from the very moment she took the nomination from Joe Biden. She wants to ban gas-powered cars. She wants to give reparations based on race. She wants to ban fracking. She wants to take away private health insurance on the job.
Well, whenever you get tired of seeing natural catastrophes again and again and again, and you know what's creating those natural catastrophes, you're going to have, if you got any common sense at all, you're going to have more of a leaning fact towards, guess what? We are doing this to ourselves. And if we don't stop doing what we're doing, it's only going to naturally get worse. Whenever you see this again and again and again, especially after the massive flooding and the hurricane that just hit down south, but you see, we have been callous to these abnormalities and now putting them in the trajectory of being normal. And to see a Category 3, 4, or 5 hurricane hit America again and again and again and again and again, basically being ravaged again and again and again and again, and all the other events is happening again and again and again. And if you're still believing the way that the old thinkers believed, if you're still going about things in the old frame of mind, they're basically walking all of us off into the mouth of the volcano. And if you want to follow after these people, I guarantee you they will accommodate you. Because things will get worse and not better whenever we're seeing these natural catastrophes. The storm that just hit, the first assessment that I got was 14 billion. I'm going to say, after me seeing everything that has went on, and that's just the stuff that I know about this went on, that I've studied just within the past 48 hours, not counting the things that I don't know about, that number will compass probably at least twice, going from $14 billion storm to more like a $28 billion storm. Because like I said, the price of real estate has went up, and some of this stuff is irreplaceable. I don't care how much money you got. You're not going to be able to replace memories. You're not going to be able to replace certain people's lives or anybody's life that has been destroyed over just this one storm. And the thing about it is, there's another one brewing right now down below the islands, down below Cancun, Mexico, that could develop into a major hurricane that could wind up knocking on our door again before the middle or latter part of this next week. When is the American people going to awaken that what we are doing to the planet is the consequences of what we're seeing on a day-to-day level, regardless whether it's extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme wetness, extreme dryness? I mean, whenever you go to an average of every 20 years seeing a major category 3 or 4 or 5 hurricane, to now we're seeing sometimes 2 and 3 hurricanes a year. I mean, last year was a pretty soft-spoken year pertaining to the hurricane season. But whenever you have, once more, facts and not fiction regarding the warming of the oceans, regarding the warming of the Gulf, how warm the water is, basically bath water. I think they said it was, 87 degrees? Something like that. And the worst thing about the Gulf that a lot of people don't realize, first of all, the Gulf in most places, ain't really all that deep. And whenever you have the lower part of the water that's just almost as warm as the upper part of the water, you have a scenario setting up towards fueling these big storms to actually monster size them, turning into supersized storms. And that's what we're seeing. Had you ever thought about this? What if, think about this for a second. You realize how much water that originated in some places, we're talking like 32, 33, 34 inches of rain out of this one storm system. Can you only imagine? And that was a storm that was doing about 20 miles an hour. That once it hit the banks, it was rolling. It was going, and it didn't take it long to go from Florida up to Georgia, from Georgia to South Carolina, from South Carolina to North Carolina, and then it bowled off, and it come back around from East Tennessee to West Tennessee. But could you only imagine if that same system set over Florida and the lower part of Georgia and just sat there and sat there and sat there, the same as we have seen storms do in Texas? Can you only imagine the flooding that they could have seen in Florida, or if it done the same thing in Georgia, in the lower part of the Appalachian Mountains, or just sat there and sat there and sat there, pertaining to what we've seen the flooding in the west side of North Carolina and the east side of Tennessee? If it just sat there and sat there and sat there? That's what we're seeing. We're seeing these deluges that are only getting worse, just like what happened in Humphreys County, Waverly, Tennessee. That storm just sat there and sat there and sat there. Kentucky has seen it. Other parts of the country has seen this. Texas has seen it. Mississippi has seen it. Arkansas, other parts of the country has seen this. These are abnormalities that are happening pertaining to the forces of nature. And you got somebody like Donald J. Trump that says, oh, no, this is just all of y'all's imagination. Drill, baby, drill, baby, drill, drill, drill. When, this is a $64,000 question. When is logic going to out-reason illogic? When is practical going to outweigh unpractical? I don't know. It may not. And because of it, as far as I'm concerned, we are on a trajectory, not just as mortal Americans, but as mortals in general, all over the world, especially whenever you have places like China that refuses to want to do anything about global warming as far as the environment. Other parts of the world that could care less about following under those same rules, EPS rules. I mean, whenever you have people that's willing to break the bank this way, then everybody suffers the consequences on account of. It's awful. It's awful. It's awful. It's awful. And there's no other way to spell it out other than it being awful. Just like the Bible talks about that God will come back and destroy those who are destroying the planet. If it was not possible for humanity to destroy the planet, it never would have been recorded in the Bible towards God coming back and destroying them who are destroying the planet. Now we have reached a point of possibility to the point of probability. We have changed the dynamics of our DNA footprint to the point that now we have gone from possibilities to more than likely going to happen. So these Republican politicians can get up there and they can mumble whatever they want to mumble, and they can tell half-truths, and they can mislead the people if they want to, but people such as myself can see through them. We know what they're trying to do. They're trying to manipulate the public. But as far as the Democrat goes, they're not perfect neither. I've heard some of the most outlandish tales and stories coming from them on both sides. That's the reason why I still say to this day, neither one of them are eligible for my vote. Neither one are eligible for my vote. Because first of all, looking at it from a practicality standpoint, I think if you was to put both parties in power at the same time, you still wouldn't be able to solve the American people's problems. And secondly, we didn't get into this problem overnight. We're not going to get out of this problem overnight. And there's nobody going to be able to take a magic wand and wave over the 48 and say, well, all your problems go away and everybody's going to be content. It ain't going to happen, folks. Not the way that they're promoting it and not the way that they're going at it. All they're doing is recycling the same old. And if you don't think that you're going to get the same results, then that is a sign of insanity. Because any psychological person, psychiatrist, will tell a drug or an alcoholic person that if you continue to keep doing the same thing and you expect different results, that is a sign of insanity.
Took as a teenager in high school. These are positions she took as a 54-year-old woman running for president in her own right. That's the true Kamala Harris, a weak, dangerous San Francisco liberal. Kamala Harris is the one who owes the American people a lot more answers. Donald Trump can simply point at his record and say, for 4 years when I was president, we had peace, prosperity, a secure border, and we were respected around the world. That's what the American people remember. That's what they're going to get when they elect him again to the White House.
But should Trump debate again?
He's already debated twice.
Okay.
And JD is going to debate Tim, and he's going to do a great job telling his story and pointing out what a radical record Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have. The American people know what Donald Trump will do in office. Kamala Harris is still trying to fool them.
Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, thanks for being here.
They know what Donald Trump is going to attempt to do in office. And to be quite frank with you, a lot of them is actually frightened to death towards what Donald Trump is going to attempt to do, towards basically going in and letting out people that shouldn't be let out of jail pertaining to the January 6th ordeal that happened in the Capitol, and other matters that Donald Trump is going to do that people are scared to death about him going to attempt to do. Please, people, Let's look at all angles whenever these politicians are telling us what they're telling us. We hope, or let me rephrase that. They believe or hope that Donald Trump is going to be as sufficient or as adequate as what he was the first time in office. He may actually be worse. He may actually be worse. And you can go from bad to worser. You can go from the firing pan to the fire.
Is appearing today on Face the Nation as a Harris campaign surrogate. Good morning, General. We appreciate your time. General McChrystal, you just heard from Senator Tom Cotton here on Face the Nation. He said the United States, when it comes to dealing with Israel and its battle against Hezbollah, should not de-escalate, should take Hezbollah to the mat. Do you believe that's the right course for the United States in the days and weeks ahead?
Well, I spent a long time in counterterrorism. We killed a lot of people. And what I learned was unless you have an outcome, a political outcome that is durable, that all of those kinds of activities don't last. So I would urge both sides, Israel and Hezbollah, to take a look at the far ridge line. Now, I know that's hard to do because once you've shed this much blood, the emotion runs deep. You killed people's parents and children and brothers and sisters on both sides. And so I think that where we are now is just spiraling the violence is unlikely to produce a good outcome. And yet, I can sympathize with both sides, the visceral desire to go after the other.
What's your assessment of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, how he's handling this moment and his strategy?
Well, I think he's got a strategy to try to push Iran into a corner, and he may be doing that. But the long-term outcome in Palestine writ large is going to be from a statesman-like view. And so if he's taking a wartime view only, I think at some point he's either going to have to widen that aperture or take a longer view of it.
You believe the Israelis and Prime Minister Netanyahu pushing Iran into a corner, as you put it. Does that mean war with Iran, between Israel and Iran, is on the horizon potentially? And what does that mean for the United States, if true?
I think anything's potential on the horizon, but I don't know.
What are you watching now, though, to see if this action with Hezbollah assassinating Nasrallah escalates into something far wider in the region? What are you watching? What are the key points?
Well, I think the key thing is the more you press the fight, the harder you go for the jugular, the more you create scar tissue that's going to last for generations. And that's a factor.
You endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris this week. You endorsed President Biden in 2020. In your op-ed in the New York Times, you talk about character. What is it about her character versus former President Trump that so convinced you to take this public stand and endorse her?
I think character is what a person does when they're under pressure. It is a combination of their deep-seated beliefs, the things, their core values, and the discipline they have to execute those, to live up to them. So I think when we look at Kamala Harris, we look at her history. She came up as a prosecutor, an attorney general, into the Senate. She has lived a number of experiences that I think build in someone the kind of character that's going to be necessary in the presidency. But let's be sure, we don't elect a president based on policies. We shouldn't. We should elect them for the character because we don't know what's going to come up. We didn't know that one-term Congressman Abraham Lincoln was going to be able to lead the United States through the Civil War. I
want to weigh in. What you're talking about is temperament. Temperament along with character. And temperament, I believe, goes a long, long way. And in some cases, temperament can actually be better than somebody that is too gung-ho. There's no doubt. We as Americans have been taught and even made pledges that we will never negotiate with a terrorist. That policy still stands true to this day, and whenever it comes to being too temperament, it can be perceived as being interpreted the wrong way. Whenever that occurs, then you're no longer sticking with your policies, but now you're compromising. I don't think that we should never compromise with the adversary that's out to kill, steal, and destroy. But at the same time, I don't think that our temperament should be on a level that we actually provoke our adversaries to where if we would have sat back, been more reasonable with our approach, used diplomatic policies and trying to reach a solution rather than going into a bloodbath, that we would all be better off than we would be to be at one another's throats. And that's exactly what the devil wants us to do. He wants us to be at one another's throats. He wants us to basically destroy ourselves. And in the likeness of destroying ourselves, destroying the planet that we're living on. That way, he can beat his chest like an ape and stand in front of God and shake his fist and say, look what I have done. I have brought the destruction to humanity once more again, the same as I have done in other eras, in other generations, beginning with the dinosaurs, and the last occurrence that I know of was the Great Flood, or even Sodom and Gomorrah, that things got so wicked and so bad that was the last and final straw that God had to resort to, was destroying all of them. Now that didn't cost you nothing. But I'm telling you right now, it can be, the pendulum can be just as far to the far right as it is the left towards being too gung-ho versus being too temperament. You got to somehow or another hit that middle zone to where everybody can get along in the betterment of the good. And if you can't, odds are you're going to make things even worse than what it would have been if you'd had the other person in power.
War. We never knew that the clothing salesman, Harry Truman, was going to be able to make the decision to drop the atomic bomb or to deal with the crisis in Korea. Those things come into a presidency in a way that tests the mettle and the character of the person in that office.
The presidency certainly tests, and it can forge leadership over time. But what convinces you now, ahead of a possible presidency, that she's ready, especially on national security and foreign policy, areas you know well?
Yeah, what do we know about anyone before they get a job like that? Young President Kennedy, when he was elected, was a young senator. He did pretty well. He struggled first through the Bay of Pigs, then did pretty well in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Donald Trump had no background in it. What we've seen from Kamala Harris convinces me she has the strength, she has the values to deal with the uncertain crises that are inevitable.
What's your view of how she and President Biden handled the withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Afghanistan's difficult. There was 20 years of American involvement in Afghanistan, and a lot of the bricks were put in place in the direction that went. There had been a decision made with the Doha Accords in the previous administration that the Biden administration had to make a decision to deal with. I didn't like the outcome in Afghanistan. I put a lot of my life there. And the young Americans who gave so much of themselves, I don't think did it in vain. I think they did it in a worthy effort that made Afghanistan a better place. But things don't always turn out like we hope they will.
You wrote in your op-ed that it's mostly about character, but you connected in your piece character to policy, especially on America's role in the world. Do you believe that Vice President Harris is, in a sense, a continuation of President Biden's foreign policy, an embrace of Western institutions like NATO, traditional American alliances? Is that one of the driving factors of your endorsement more than just her personal character?
I think Vice President Harris's character is going to drive policies based upon values, but very common sense values. She's a practical person, and I think that will come out.
But there's a real debate in this country about America's role in the world. Trump, the former president, constantly talks about America first, has skepticism toward how NATO functions in some respects. Do you worry that if Trump wins another term of the presidency, that America's role in the world would change in a fundamental way?
It already has
America's
changed.
role in the world is critical. Take, for example, the war in Ukraine. You can make an argument that Ukraine is not a strategic national interest for the United States. I cannot accept an argument that Europe is not. And yet, if Ukraine falls to Russian aggression, even a significant part of it, the Baltic states and our NATO alliance is going to be increasingly threatened, and I would argue weakened. And I think long term, that's much against our interest.
Is it credible that, as Trump says, that he could cut a deal to end the war in Ukraine?
I would doubt that. But if he has a deal,
He doesn't talk about details, as we just discussed with Senator Cotton, but he's claiming he can cut a deal. Would Vice President Harris?
I think it's wishful thinking. That's what I think. I think it's dreaming. And once more, it's a way for these politicians, just like the Republican senator before this interview here, rather than just come out and say, well, I wish this, or I hope for this, or I believe this, they have a way of intertangling, let me use that word, intertangling some of the facts with the fiction. And it's actually basically drawing straws, hoping for the best, but at the same time expecting the worst. But if the American people aren't careful enough to listen to every word and what they're saying, how they're saying it, they'll never catch on the differences between the facts and the fiction, or the hopes and the hopes versus the reality. They'll never catch on because they're that good with their silver tongue talking.
First, you think be able to end the war between Russia and Ukraine?
I think it's going to be difficult to end this war. I personally think we need to support Ukraine as strong as we can so that their sovereignty is protected as we come out.
So many former military officials, top leaders who have served, men and women in uniform, have come out against former President Donald Trump. There are those, of course, like former retired General Keith Kellogg, who do support former President Trump. But high-profile people like yourself have raised concerns. I think about General Milley. General Milley had concerns in the final days of Trump's presidency about how he was handling his work. And you have concerns. You've endorsed Vice President Harris. It comes down to one core question here. General McChrystal, do you believe former President Donald Trump is fit for office?
I believe that Vice President Harris is fit to lead the country in the presidency.
Well, let's go right to the question of Trump. Is he fit for office or not? You're a former top leader of the United States military. You're supporting a presidential candidate. You have a former president now running for the presidency again. You seem to have core character questions. Is he fit for office or not?
Hey, Bob, let's be honest. Why would a retired military officer come on to endorse his opponent?
You tell me.
Because I think character is very important. And so I'm voting for character. I'm voting for Kamala Harris.
General Stanley McChrystal, we appreciate you stopping by Face the Nation and sharing your views. Thank you very much. And we'll be right back with a lot more Face the Nation. Stay with us.
Let's see what else is going to come on here. More politics. Let's avoid politics. Let's go forward. I've heard enough politics. Man, it's commercials. Let's go back. Back up. Back up. Right there. Right there.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We turn now to the devastation of Hurricane Helene. She made landfall in Florida early Friday and swept through southeastern states. The damage has been enormous in terms of the death toll and loss of homes and businesses. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell joins us now for an update on the recovery efforts. Administrator, thanks for being here. What can you share about the latest death toll from this devastating hurricane?
Good morning, Robert. Right now I'm here in Florida, and I believe yesterday as I traveled with the governor to assess damages there, he accounted for 11 deaths here, but I would refer to the states for the specific numbers because they're the ones that are tracking this. But what I can tell you is we are getting reports of multiple fatalities across the 5 states.
Which regions have been hardest hit?
So this has been, Robert, a true multi-state event. I have seen, my team on the ground has seen significant impacts in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee. I saw the impacts here in Florida yesterday. I'm traveling to Georgia today so I can see the impacts firsthand there. And I'll be in North Carolina on Monday so I can assess the impacts there. But we're hearing significant infrastructure damage to water systems, communication, roads, critical transportation routes, as well as several homes that have been just destroyed by this. So this is going to be a really complicated recovery in each of these 5 states that have had these impacts.
And where has the flooding been worst? Where do you see real problem areas still at this moment?
Well, here in Florida, they had up to 15 feet of storm surge in Taylor County, which is where I was at with the governor yesterday. These are record storm surges across the Big Bend area. I heard reports of up to 9 feet of storm surge in the St. Pete Beach area. In North Carolina, we're still in active search and rescue mode. They're still having flooding issues and landslides, and so we're still actively working on search and rescue missions up in North Carolina. But we've had significant wind and flooding damage again in all 5 of these states.
Was North Carolina in particular prepared for this level of flooding? Have they ever dealt with anything at this magnitude?
This is really, Robert, historic flooding up in North Carolina, and especially this western part of North Carolina. I don't know that anybody could be fully prepared for the amount of flooding.
Well, what happened? I don't know. What did happen?
We have sent bottled water in, but we also have the Army Corps of Engineers that's getting ready to start assessments today to see what we can do to help get those water systems back online quickly. And we're also moving in satellite communication, Starlink satellites into the area to help facilitate the lack of communication that part of the state is experiencing.
And what are you seeing in terms of health consequences from this hurricane, in terms of water quality, access to food, access to medicine?
All of it is having really significant impacts. We know that many healthcare systems have been impacted. And so we also have healthcare assessment teams that are assessing the hospitals and the ability to support the people that are experiencing impacts from this storm. There are multiple boil water notices across all 5 states. And so that's why we're bringing in teams to help assess those water systems to see what we can do to get them back online as quickly as we can. But we're also, again, bringing in the commodities.
How do you conceptualize this storm in the broader question of climate change?
Well, I think what we're seeing, Robert, is, this storm took a while to develop, but once it did, it developed and intensified very rapidly. And that's because of the warm waters in the Gulf. And so it's creating more storms that are reaching this major category level than we've seen in the past. It's also creating greater amounts of storm surge in the coastal areas. It's creating greater amounts of rainfall as it moves up north. And so in the past, when we would look at damage from hurricanes, it was primarily wind damage with some water damage, but now we're seeing so much more water damage. And I think that is a result of the warm waters, which is a result of climate change.
And here in Washington, the question now turns to resources. Does FEMA have what it needs to deal with this level of storm, this moment in history with this kind of hurricane?
Well, we absolutely have enough resources from across the federal family. FEMA's one part of the team, and we have the ability to bring in all of our team members from many other federal agencies to support this response. As we move into recovery, we can pivot those resources to help support that recovery portion. Recovery can be complicated. These 5 states are going to have very complicated recoveries, but we will continue to bring those resources in to help them, technical assistance as they're trying to identify the best ways to rebuild.
Administrator Criswell, we appreciate your time and best wishes to all of those helping those in need in this area of the country. A tough moment. We'll be right back. Author of a new book at war with ourselves. Good morning, General. Thanks for being here.
Robert, great to be with you.
You just heard from retired General McChrystal. He has made an endorsement. You have not. Why not?
Well, Robert, I respect his ability to make that decision and right to make that decision. But what concerns me these days is the military is getting drug in to partisan politics. And you hear really both parties trying to involve the military. Now, of course, General McChrystal is endorsing Vice President Harris as an individual, but I think sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between an individual endorsement and the military getting drug into partisan politics, right? You hear this narrative these days, from some people on the far right that the military is woke, or from the far left that the military is extremist. Hey, the military is not woke or extremist, right? The military is doing its duties under the Constitution and for whoever's elected commander-in-chief. So that's been a big part of my reticence. And then the other role is, I think, Robert, the other reason is, I don't think anybody needs me to tell them how to vote, right? In the book and in other venues, I lay all of it out, right? The good, the bad, the ugly, of the Trump administration. But I do so in context of the 8 Obama years that followed it, and the 4 that preceded it, and the 4 Biden years that followed it. So I think voters should make their own decisions, and what I've tried to do is help inform voters, no matter which way they're leaning.
Let's turn to the Middle East. What's your view? You heard from Senator Cotton, you heard from General McChrystal. How do you see a possible war on the horizon, if any, between Israel and Iran? Or is there something that can be done, especially by the United States, to contain what is happening?
Robert, I would say there already is a war between Israel and Iran, and it's a war that Iran has been waging for 4+ decades. Nasrallah, who was there at the beginning of Hezbollah, who was there when they killed 241 Marines in Beirut, and began a campaign against not only who Nasrallah called the cancerous boil of Israel, but the great Satan of the United States. And Nasrallah, remember what his catchphrase was at the end of almost many of the speeches that he gave, which was, "The Jews are vulnerable because they love life. We can take that away from them. We will win because they love life and we love death." And so the Israelis have had really no choice. Remember, right after the heinous attacks of October 7th, that's when Hezbollah launched rockets at Israel in solidarity with Hamas. That resulted in the evacuation of 10% of Israel's territory. About 70,000 Israelis are out of their homes. And so I think Israel is taking the right approach to escalate against an enemy who's been able to escalate really on their own terms with impunity. And I think increasingly the United States has to act like we know what the return address is in Iran. Now's the time to double down on the pressure on Iran, to dry up the cash flow.
What does that mean, though? Just in terms of financial action, or do you...
Once more, to drop the cash flow, you're looking at something that's unpractical. Just like Donald Trump said, we never should have given them the oil to begin with. We never should have given them the authority to be in control of the oil. Because they have got the oil, now they've got the financing. Because they got the financing, now they can sponsor all these other terrorists. It's turned into nothing but a beehive. As a friend that I talked to last night said, it's a counter peg. It's a counter peg fixing to go off, and it's just a matter of when, where, and how bad it's going to be. So whenever you're dealing with these extremes, is the momentum that Yahoo in Israel is pursuing, is that the right way? Because the way it looks to me, and I'm not no war analyst, I'm not no Winston Churchill, but the way it looks to me, if they continue to do what they're doing in the pursuit of all this, it's just a matter of time before America is going to be involved in a full-fledged war. It's just a matter of time. Because anytime you knock diplomacy completely off the table and you're no longer willing to talk or discuss the means of both sides getting along or working it out, then basically you have planted a seed of destruction, doom and gloom. That's the trajectory that I think that we're on. You can take it for what it's worth. Like I said, I'm not a Winston Churchill, but I do have eyes, and I can see what's going on. And I do have an opinion about what has went on and what is going on.
Might need to be a U.S. military role down the line for the United States in the Middle East.
Well, there already is a military
in terms of
role.
ground troops or airstrikes.
Well, I think both. All of this should be kind of on the table, and I think we should act like we know where those rockets are coming from. The 150,000 rockets that Hezbollah has pointed at Israel, the 40,000 or so members of Iran's proxy army in Syria, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas in the West Bank, what remains of Hamas in Gaza, those were all trained, equipped, supplied by Iran to create this ring of fire around Israel and to destroy Israel and kill all the Jews. The precursor to that is to act against us. Robert, 175 attacks against U.S. forces and U.S. installations by Iranian proxies since October 8th of last year.
General, you say the United States and Israel should be in lockstep or at least aligned as they move forward. But the Pentagon has said, the Biden administration has said they were not informed about these attacks ahead of time. So what does that say about the real state of play between Israel and the United States?
I think what Israel has determined is that it had to protect its security and secrecy around this operation. If you think about the blows that they delivered to Hezbollah in the past week, 10 days, it's really unprecedented. You know, just killing so many of them, winning so many with the beepers and then the walkie-talkies. And then when they couldn't talk securely, they met at a location in Beirut, struck that target. So, you know, Nasrallah has been taken out, but so has all the cadre around him. These are decades long of relationships and knowledge. And so I think now's the time to put on the financial sanctions. Why did the Biden administration not enforce the Trump-era sanctions against Iran and allowed about $100 billion to flow to that theocratic dictatorship? Now's the time to reverse that policy.
So that Israel has taken out military targets. Lebanon is saying that many civilians have been killed. What should the U.S. do in terms of protecting civilian deaths moving forward?
Yeah.
Talking to Israel about that issue. What needs to be done on the civilian front?
Well, what you want is you need firepower to overwhelm this enemy, but you also want to apply that firepower with discrimination.
Is that being done?
Well, it depends on the calculus at the time. Remember, the bunker in which Nasrallah was killed was underground, several stories underground, underneath where? An apartment complex. And so it's Hezbollah. Remember, he said, we love death. Remember what Hamas leadership said just before the October 7th attacks. The purpose, one of the purposes of that attack was to get some of their own people killed. You know, so they could use that against Israel. So it's really important, I think, at this stage, to continue to impress on the Israelis, apply firepower with discrimination, but also to recognize that these terrorist organizations are the principal causes for the violence and destitution and the suffering of the people in Gaza and the people in Lebanon. Look at the great promise of Lebanon. It's a beautiful country. Look at what Hezbollah has done to that country. With their alliance with the Syrians in the 2000s. Remember, we had the Cedar Revolution.
Now, I agree with what he's talking about right there, because it's a quirky way of using reverse psychology and basically provoking your enemy, standing under the umbrella of women and children, our civilians, knowing that the only way for your enemy, which would at that time would be Israel, to attack Hamas would be to take out civilians. It was a planned strategy all along. And it's almost like reverse psychology, nanny, nanny, boo, I dare you. And it puts Israel in a damned if you do and a damned if you don't type scenario. So it's it's touchy. It's very dicey in what's happening right now. And it reaches the point that you basically have to weigh out the differences between let's just use the internet for an example. You got to weigh out the differences between the benefits of the good versus the bad. If the benefits of the good outweigh the benefits of the bad, then odds are we'll probably continue to have the internet, we'll probably continue to have artificial intelligence, we'll probably continue to have social media. If it reaches the point that we know for a fact that all these entities that we've created are more bad than they are good, hopefully somebody will pull the plug. You got to look at the war the same way, pertaining to President Yahoo over there, that first of all, you're going to have casualties. You're going to have carnal damage. And what this idiot is doing, he's basically standing under the umbrella of women and children, thinking that that's going to protect him. But at the same time, if Israel does move, then they're going to be put in a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario that in the eyes of the public, they're going to look just as bad, if not worse, than Hamas. So somebody put a lot of thought into this pertaining to these strategies. But I still say that it was a letdown from that government's positioning that allowed for all those tunnels and all that activity to go on, knowing good and well that as long as it took to dig all those tunnels and to do all that, somebody had to have known and seen what was happening. I don't know. It's once more, it's a dicey situation. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Does the consequences outweigh the benefits? Does the benefits outweigh the consequences? Once more, I'm not a war analyst, but I am intelligent enough to see where this is all escalating versus de-escalating. I am smart enough to see that, and if other people can't see that, then obviously they don't want to see it, or they just don't care to see it. But it's getting worse rather than it's getting better. And whenever it comes to seeing the suffering of civilians, I'm sure we ain't seen the tail end of that yet.
In 2006, after Hariri's assassination, I mean, the Lebanese people are destitute in large measure because of Hezbollah.
And just finally here, former President Donald Trump, who you know well.
But we could say that about all these different countries that has these oligarchs that want to keep their people under subjection, want to keep their people down, want to basically divide the biggest pieces of the pie to those that's already in power. That's probably some of the corruptest that's in there right now. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario.
He met with President Zelensky in recent days. He keeps talking about being able to broker something between Zelensky and Putin. Do you buy it?
You know, I don't really buy it in terms of, hey, in 24 hours it can be. I think it's a real myth, right? It's a real misunderstanding of war to assume that you can get a favorable political outcome without a favorable military outcome. That's never really happened in war. And so I think the right course of action is, if you want to accelerate toward progress toward a settlement, is to convince Putin that he's losing the war. I think that's the only way you get a favorable settlement. How do you do that? You demonstrate our resolve to continue to support the Ukrainians as they defend themselves against this continued onslaught by the Russians. That's how you get to maybe favorable conditions.
Now, I agree with what he just said, too. The things that Donald Trump's talking about is only wishful thinking. For somebody to think that they're going to be able to pick up the phone and call up the president of Russia, and all of a sudden they listen to Donald Trump's request, is a fantasy. It's a fantasy.
Conditions for negotiation.
Gentlemen,
it's wishful thinking. And I realize that Donald Trump is out there trying to gather up as many votes as he can, because don't nobody want to see bloodshed ordinarily if they got right minds. So he's basically pulling off the hinges of trying to gather up all these votes and convincing all these people, well, all I got to do is pick up the phone, tell President Putin, stop the war, and he's going to stop it. If you believe that, after seeing the pain and the suffering and the bloodshed, I have oceanfront property in Phoenix, Arizona that I'm willing to sell you today for a very small amount of money. Once more, you got to look through the smoke screen of these politicians that are willing to say anything for an extra vote, just so they can become in power. But you also got to look at it logically, and you got to look at it practically towards what would be the practicality of this in it actually occurring versus not occurring. It's wishful thinking. It's a fantasy. And if the people buy into all that, good luck to you is all I got to say.
We appreciate you coming on Face the Nation. Hope you come again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in a moment.
This ought to be coming to the tail end of this. He ought to finish up his presentation here real quick.
At least for dinner.
Governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. Governor Hogan, thanks for being here in one of the key Senate races in the country. You are not running alongside former President Donald Trump.
See, I don't like this. This is, we got so many major things going on in people's lives right now. And I'm not saying that this show should be surrounded all about this hurricane and the damages of the hurricane, but I'm just so emotionally moved by so many thousands of lives, if not millions of lives, that has been affected by this last storm. And to think that we got another one creeping up the same pathway, is heartbreaking.
I'm just hopeful that in this debate, we can have a real, healthy debate on the issues that people care about. You know, people are concerned about the economy and inflation, affordability. They're concerned about crime and the border. Hopefully those candidates will talk about it instead of just typical politics.
Governor Larry Hogan, thank you for being here.
You can hope in one hand and poo-poo in the other and see which one fills up the quickest, right? Right? Hope in one hand, poo-poo in the other, and see which one fills up the quickest. It's kind of like wishing. Hope is in a sense like wishing from a political standpoint. Well, I wish that this would happen. I hope that this is going to occur. It's metaphors. Metaphors to be spoken in a way from these silver tongue talkers that can convince the public of bad results, even though they presented it in a good way. And that's exactly what's happened to the American people again and again and again, towards them being lied to. Because a lot of the things that these politicians get on TV and talk about is nothing more than a pipe dream. Now, this woman right here, whenever it comes to the repercussion of all the illegal immigrants, she has lost that ballot whenever it comes to her protecting the American people regarding all the illegals over here. That administration should have concentrated more so on the same type of references that Donald Trump was trying to promote towards the safety and security of the American people versus just walking away and just leaving it. I mean, that's just factual. Proof is in the pudding. She did not do her job, and now she's all of a sudden wanting to go down there and hopefully make amends. That way I'll look good in the eyes of everybody else that's going to vote for me. Oh, vote for me, vote for me, vote for me. I promise you this, I promise you that. We'll do this together, we'll do that together. And ultimately, whenever it's all said and done with, don't nobody get nothing. Because it was all just a big smoke screen. It was all just a big pipe dream. God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors towards where America goes from this moment on. And good luck to each and every one of us. Need to pray a special prayer for the victims of this last storm that come up through here, as well as other hardships that has fallen upon the people's lives, regardless whether it come in the form of one form or the other. And just pray for this great nation, that we, as a Christian society, will do the right things before it's too late. In Jesus' name, shalom.